I'm so excited to be able to give this Zoom talk about something that's really dear to my heart. I'm right now at the North House Folk School. I was taking a family vacation at Tetagooch State Park, where the Baptism River flows into Lake Superior, the big sea shining water, the land of Gitche Gumee. So I'm up here right on the North Shore. If I look out these windows, I can see the lake. So that's pretty exciting. And North House is of course, a sister to Vesterheim and have a deep, long history of collaborating and working on things together to support Scandinavian folk arts and Northern folk arts. So this is a pretty good thing. So as Greg said in my introduction, I am a coal roaster, which if you're like, well, what is coal roasting? I do not even know that word. Coal roasting is like tattooing wood. It's cutting, making an incision through the wood, putting pigment into that incision, putting oil in the incision, and then burnishing it over, and you come up with a beautiful design. And it's really at the heart of 19th century Norwegian spoon carving. So we'll get to that, but I just want to preview that just a little bit. And I'm a spoon carver, and I'm an amateur folklorist. Not much is studied about these old spoons, and they're just kind of buried deep in collections, if at all. So I've been super interested in finding out what that history and the folklore of coal roasting is. So I'm gonna push way back in this talk to talk about some carving traditions in Norway that kind of set the context for this story. This is a photograph of me in Sweden at the Skansen Museum, looking at this great coal roast unusual spoon that has two bowls in it. And I think that is a courtship spoon, but I'm not sure. Spoons have a tremendous history with courtship and those developing relationships. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, I think. The context for my work and for my studying and for my going deeper into spoon carving and coal roasting, since coal roasting is so central to the Norwegian spoon carving tradition, and it's endangered, it's almost gone in Norway. And so my journey has been about the loss and recovery of traditional craft. And that spoon carving and coal roasting are democratic crafts. They don't involve real expensive tools, just a knife, an axe, some hook knife, and you're ready to go. And so they're democratic in that way. And the theme of democracy for me is a very important one. And seeing that through the lens of craft gives me different insights into each. And so trying to keep this democratic craft alive, that I learn every day that meaning making is essential to that, how you make meaning of your work and not just copying something ancient or old and doing it in exactly the same way and not bringing that forward. So these are all part of the stories that weave through my being a coal roasting, spoon carving, folkloring person. We can go to the next slide, Greg. Thanks. And if we do that, I believe that these objects that we make and the old objects that we find, that they transcend time and space. They connect us to our past, to our future, and to each other. When I eat with the old spoon that came over with my ancestors in 1850 to right around Decorah, Iowa, I connect to my ancestors and I connect to Norway. When I eat on a plate turned by my friend Jared Dahl. I'm renewing a conversation with him. And when I look at a flat plane figure carving by Harley Refsall, there he is, right there with me. And so they cross oceans, they cross time, they cross geography. These handmade things that we make, and the making of it also, when we do that together, we come around it, and we're discovering and we're rediscovering, and as we do that, we are making deep communities and relationships that endure over time. So there's never been a more important time for craft, and also to know the history of our craft, the folklore of our craft. So that's what my journey increasingly, as a woman who can, no, I can't, well, maybe I could call myself young because I feel like I'm young in spirit, but I'm turning into a young elder. And I know that my young crafting friends are just thirsty for this. They're thirsty for it. And that we cross intergenerational lines through craft. We cross political lines through craft. We cross language lines through craft. And so it's important right now. It's super important. That's its promise. And go to the next one. Yeah. So some of the context for what I've learned is by a road trip that I took last fall, not this past fall, but the fall of 24, starting in Stockholm and going up through to Söderglanten in the Dala region of Sweden, and then crossing up into Norway through Røros, which is a medieval mining town, copper mining town, that's a World Heritage Site, and then up to Trondheim. So you see that kind of dead center. It's the tallest word there, Trondheim, which turns out was the financial and artistic capital of medieval Northern Europe. And we'll come back to that one too. Trondheim, and then down the Grunsbandalen valley, which is redundant, I think, if you speak Norwegian, but down that valley, following through the epic mountains down to Lillehammer, where the 1994 Olympics were, and then to down through the area that Toten spoons were made. We'll find out what Toten spoons are. To Rauland University there, Seljord and Oslo, and then out. So I was on the search of these old 19th century spoons on this trip. So that's the map of the adventure that I'm going to take. Yeah, I think that's good. We can go to the next slide. So I said Trondheim in 1150 AD. Unbelievably, this was mind-blowing to me, was the epicenter, financial epicenter of Northern Europe. And the carving there was off the chain. And so part of that is because they had fish to trade, but another big part of it was the most valuable thing in medieval Northern Europe was tusk and bone carving. So that scepter has a fancier name, but I think that a pope kind of carries that long top of that staff that you see on the right is bone carving, and they carved from narwhal tusk, from walrus tusk, and then large animals that live in the far north. And that the tusk carving in particular was as valuable as bars of gold or bars of platinum in our time. And when they were highly decorated like that, it increased their value. And, the Pope's throne, it probably has a different name than that, but with the chair that the Pope sits in was carved of all this intricate bone. The chair on the left is the Tildal chair, and this is a copy of the Tildal chair, which was made by Lara Dominighetti. And Lara Dominighetti is a medieval experimental archaeologist, meaning that she carves things and learns how to do these things by looking at the old stuff, trying to get the old tools, and then figuring out how they must have gone about coming up with the designs and the structures that they do. So I bring the Tildal chair here because the Tildal chair pushed back my knowledge of coal roasting from the latest that I saw was from the 16th century back 400 or 500 years, because coal roasting was used in the relief carving of these chairs. And this chair, this very ornate chair, is one of the only surviving of this age wooden carved chairs of its kind from Norway. And it was undoubtedly carved for the visit of a bishop coming to Trondheim. And it was carved so that it looked like bone carving or tusk carving. But the techniques had to be done by very skilled woodworkers because of the grain of the wood. And they had to have very intimate knowledge of the trees, because this is a very light, almost white birch. And the timing of getting that birch, you get that white color in March harvest. And if anyone knows why that is, I would be very interested to talk with you. But as I talked with Lotta, we both agreed that you get this really beautiful white color in birch that's harvested in early spring, late winter, so that it would look like bone. So the technique that Lotta used for carving this chair, she had this chisel knife, if you can, that you would hold like this and push with your thumb, that would carve a skew line through the wood. And it's exactly the technique that I use for coal roasting. And she was calling it coal roasting. So this excited me very much and pushed back, like, okay, how were people doing it? What techniques were they using? And then in the process, learning this history about medieval Trondheim, which was just blowing me away. Like, I had no idea. So we can go to the next slide. But all of this wealth and knowledge and skill and craftsmanship gets decimated by the Black Plague in Norway, which hits in about 1350 AD. And the Black Plague was particularly harsh on Norway because it disproportionately, compared to other countries, took out the aristocracy and the ruling leading class, so that any kind of administration structure within Norway, regardless of what you think about an administrative structure, if you don't have any, then that really plunged these isolated folks into really survival mode. And the winters were exceptionally harsh. I mean, I'm up here, and yesterday it was wind chill was 25 below zero, and that's like a walk in the park in these mountainous valleys in Norway. And so the growing season was short, the winter was long and dark and cold, and people died of starvation, they died of exposure. And 95% of Norway is covered in mountains. And the same, that only about 5% is farmable land. So you can imagine the harsh conditions in as a result of the Black Plague, where half the population died. Half the population. So the people who were left, they barely had enough labor to do the stuff of surviving, much less developing all this, keeping alive all this beautiful skilled artwork that had thrived and blossomed in Trondheim. So you have this loss of carving in Norway. And when I went to the Maihaugen Museum to look in the this is in Lillehammer, to look deep in the collections, the curator Ole said to me, it was like children. The work in, the 1600s, it takes that long to come back, is almost childlike. So the next slide. So these are things that I saw at Maihaugen. The oldest one, I think, is that mug to the left. Is a tankard. So that's old coal roasting there. And then the scene in the center, that horse, that was a Tina bread tray. So bent wood box in an oval with a handle that goes over the top. If you're just looking at the slides, you're missing. I'm just doing massive drawings in the air to create the shape of that thing. But on it is this coal roast horse, and protection symbols, like the above the horse, that geometric form is a protection symbol. And then engraved into it was, this is a bread basket made, and it was a place name, to be taken by horse with haste to this other town. And then it was dated 1657. Actual date on it. So really exciting, old coal roasting. You see an old spoon in the second from the left, and then you see a really old 18th century spoon on the right. Both the dollar horse on the bread tray, that just thrilled me, and I had got a tattoo of that coal roast horse on my hand because I just wanted him with me all the time. The one on the far right was on a spoon from Wisconsin. We'll see it in a rack in a few slides down. And I looked at it and I just started laughing. I have been a cartoonist much of my life, drawing little caricatures and stuff. And I looked at that and it just tickled me pink. And I looked at it, I was like, what kind of animal is that? We don't know. Is it a horse or is it a moose? Particularly a baby moose. And there are people that are like, yes, it's a horse because it has a tail. And there are people that say, but look at that long snout and those hoofs and the high shoulders. It's definitely a baby moose. And what I know about coal roasting is that a lot of the coal roasting in the 19th century was done by children. And so I think a child could say, well, I'm just going to put a tail on that moose. You can go to the next slide. We've got a detail of it. There it is. So now I just call it a morse. We don't know if it's a moose or a horse. And, there's what this underscores for me is just when I talked about this being a democratic art form, a democratic craft, like it's folk art. You don't have to be like Rembrandt to make something like that just tickles you and just makes you giggle and laugh and love it. And that love might be a reason that spoon survived, because wood was pretty disposable and you could use it up and it would burn in the fire. We can go to the next slide. So if you think about wooden spoons, like I said, they don't last that long. They're not like silver. They don't last as long as bone. And they were what poor people had. So if you had a wooden spoon, that was a sign that you were low class, and it might mean that you were rural and uneducated. So it carried a lot of class markers and societal markers with it to have a wooden spoon. wooden, if you had money, you had a silver spoon, and that's where you kept your wealth, was in your cutlery. Farmers kept their wealth in cutlery. Those of you who might have read Lars Smitting's The Silver Bells trilogy would know a little bit about that. He describes it in his book. And if you're out there and you haven't read those books, man, get those books and read them if you want to know about old Norway. Oh my God, they're the best in the world. And there's a Vesterheim Zoomcast thing that was just done a month or two ago with Lars. So, man, thumbs up on that. But back to spoons. So silver spoons were the mark of status and wealth. And so the wooden spoons often were carved to look like the silver spoon. So you can go forward to the next slide. And here you see really a very much a copy of what the silver spoons looked like. My understanding from Harley, and that's a 16th century spoon, and you can see it's well carved, but the kind of what you might call writing kinds of things on it are much more crude than the carving up the handle of that stem. What I understand from Harley and others, but Harley was the first, Harley Refsal was the first that I heard this from, was that these Scandinavian spoons, especially Norwegian spoons, have such a big bowl in comparison to the handle, is that you were living in a very small area in the wintertime because you had to heat it. And that foodstuffs there in remote areas was also very scarce. So what he described was, you took the board off the wall, smorgasbord, you put the board on out like a bench, and you had a big pot of what he described as gruel, and you'd take these big, bold spoons, dip them in there, and then just nibble off the side of your spoon. So it was like a plate, like a little tiny plate, and you could dip it in again and just nibble off it. So that's the style of these 17th century spoons. And also people carving in the spirit of classes that were higher class than they were, and doing it out of wood. Next slide. So it's hard to find these old spoons. They don't survive. And one of the best places that you can find them is in shipwrecks. So these are sailors' spoons from the wreck of the Vasa, which sunk in 1628. Well, this is not part of this spoon carving story. You should check out the story of the Vasa, because, oh my God, it was like, no, make it bigger, make it better, make it more important, make it like taller and taller and more guns on it, more, bigger, better. And they made it wrong because they kept insisting on adding more carvings and decorations to it. That was massive. Gets out into the bay in Stockholm, and the wind comes along, and wow, it goes over. Water comes in the gun ports, and it sunk within a half an hour. And it's a kind of pride goeth before the fall story. So that's the story of the Vasa. But the gift of the Vasa to us, because these objects transcend time and space, a shipwreck is like a time capsule. Like, it's just what it was, goes down into the ocean and into the water. And when it's down there, it's an anaerobic environment. So and the water is very cold. So these wooden things, the whole ship survived. So it's at the Vasa Museum. You can go see it, and I strongly encourage you to do so if you're in Stockholm. But these are spoons that came up from the deep water. On some of them, you can see coal roasting. You can also see echoes of that shape I was talking about, particularly in the collection of spoons on the left. And we can go to the next slide. And then these are spoons that are just a little bit older than those sailor spoons. And these you see kind of moving away from the big, bold, short-handled ones, and they start getting decorative items on them. And if you look at right above the lists, It's the fourth spoon over from the left. That is the Morse spoon right there. I was so lucky that I got to take it out and handle it there. So here's what spoons look like in the 18th century, in the 1700s. And we can go to the next slide. And then in the 19th century, we get, so those were 18th century spoons that we just looked at. We get to the 19th century, and in the Hallingdal area of Norway, which is, think of it as roughly southwest of Lillehammer, that in the wintertime, there was, in about 1830, a creative entrepreneurial farmer named Ole Skattum, Skattum. And Ole was a spoon carver, and he started carving spoons that have a very, very consistent form, a very consistent shape, a very consistent style, and could make them quickly. And he would carve them and have his family do the finishing and the decoration of the spoons. And that started growing. Other families started making these spoons. And it started bringing in an income for the farmers. Let's take a look at what the spoons look like. We can go to the next slide. So this is really characteristic of a Toten spoon, this profile. They have a very flat top. If we had tipped these spoons just a little bit so that we were looking at them dead on, you would see that the bowl, the top, the rim of the bowl is dead flat. And then this handle that just kind of curves away almost into nothingness. They're so thin at the end. They're just so graceful, like a bird wing. They just take my breath away when I see them. They were undoubtedly made with a shaving horse. So you would clamp the spoon block or a spoon blank, have it roughly spoon shaped with an axe, clamp it in a shave horse that would hold the spoon so that the spoon, I should have a spoon in my pocket so I can demonstrate this. Thank God I do. I don't know how well you can see this, but you would clamp this part of the spoon upside down. This is a kayak spoon. It's not a Toten spoon. Sorry about that. But clamp it in like that upside down, and you would take a draw knife and just slice off the wood like that. And that gives you that really beautiful arch that you see on the underneath. That's how you get that shape. And then you come down with a knife on the top of the handle to get that form. But getting that bowl dead flat and the handle back there and having it be durable, like that's a really skilled spoon maker to make those forms. You can go to the next slide. These are spoons from the Vesterheim collection. This is a clutch of 6 matching spoons that are in that Toten form. They're coal roast with birds and flowers, and the handles have more flower forms on them. So you see these sets of them if you're very, very, very lucky. And those are a good guess is from about 1850, 1860. Somewhere there. You can go to the next slide. Here's another set that was in the Maihaugen Museum. That handle form, you see both the ones that we were just looking at and this handle form where it kind of has notches in it. My guess is the one that have notches are a little bit later. I'm going to guess they're maybe 1880s, but that's just an educated guess. So you see both of these forms coming. That would have the same profile that we were just looking at. Go to the next one. And so there's not much documented about these spoons. So what I learned in Seljord, Norway, staying with my friend Jeppe. And Jeppe he was Danish, but he could read Norwegian. He pulls this book off the shelf, this out of print paperback book that was a version of a book written in 1868 by Sund, and it's on Norwegian Sloyd, Husfliden, housecraft, Husfliden. And so he says that a skilled man in 1868, a skilled man could make 45 spoons in a day. And a really skilled man could make 60 in a day. And you could have a family that made 12,000 a year. So if you think, well, they were being made till about from 1830, they get ramped up and then they fade out by about 1930, this 100-year span. But if they're producing those kinds of numbers, it's easy to extrapolate that there's going to be, at least 500,000, maybe 750,000 of these spoons made. And they were both sold in cities. By the 1860 or later, something like that, Germans were able to come up through that big valley, and they were tourist items for the Germans, who began fetishizing the Norwegians. We'll return to that. And so they traveled around. They traveled with Norwegian immigrants to the U.S. And they're all, given the amount that was made, they're kind of all disappeared. And this was quite alarming to me, and quite like, what is happening here? So we can go to the next slide. Before I go to that alarming part, I want to go back to cheerful parts. And just so you can see the kind of playful images that are on these spoons. The one on the left with the chicken and the woman and child was at the Maihaugen Museum. The one on the right, the beloved parasol lady, is in the Vesterheim collection. And she just looks like she's floating along with her parasol. I mean, they just, the charm of them is just spectacular. Next one. These are all birds. And you can see that some of them have, a goose, a hen, a pheasant, writing on them. You don't see a lot of inscriptions on these spoons. You see illustrations, but not a lot of inscriptions. And my belief is that you don't see so many inscriptions because the people who were doing them were illiterate. Beautiful craftsmen and hugely knowledgeable, but not folks that had access to formal schooling. Next one. This is all shots of the same spoon, the lamb and the bowl. This is from the Vesterheim collection. And then what looks like rosemaling in the handle. And then this one's dated 1867. You can see on the back with initials. I've learned that sometimes these initials have either an S or a D in them that would indicate the daughter of or the son of. But I need more information about that. But often you'll see a D there, and it makes me curious: is that D the person who co-roasted the daughter of the father with the initials? But I don't know that for sure. If someone knows that, you could let me know. Next slide. This is my favorite of the co-roast items: is the soldier and the lady. And take a look at the lady. She's, I'm just going to offer that she's perhaps buxomous. And she has a kid there. And there's the soldier, and his eyes are just like googly eyes. Just like, what is the relationship there, and what love is there, and who got to carry those spoons? Like, did she keep the soldier's spoon while the soldier kept her spoon when he went off soldiering? They're a matched pair, you can see in the center shot. So they just bring up all these stories and all these emotions as we look at the stories that the coal roasting can tell in the spoons. Next slide. So at this point in our journeys, we were in the heart of the Toten Spoon area. And so we had been on the road for 4 weeks, searching for coal roasting, searching for coal roast spoons out in the wild. And that whole trip, we only found 3 really worn out, fairly plain spoons. And that was really a surprise to us that we weren't finding them. And we were like, what happened to these? We had some sense that they had started disappearing in the 1930s. And then we were in a small antique store / flea market secondhand place. And my partner, Aaron, finds this spoon along with a coal roast cutting board. And the cutting board was dated 1931. And I think that this spoon was, this big serving spoon was contemporary with that cutting board. Now, by this time, one of the things that had happened was World War I. And after World War I, they could use all the equipment that made armaments to make inexpensive metal spoons. So you see metal spoons replacing wooden spoons and being affordable and more commonplace. They could be mass produced cheaply. And this starts happening in the 20s. So this spoon, if it's in the 30s, early 30s, if it's contemporary with that other coal roast piece, 1931. So, and it's a big ass serving spoon. I mean, it was just stunning. And we pull it out and we're excited and we see that beautiful profile. Like, wow, this is a big Toten serving spoon by someone who really knew what they were doing. And it has this inscription on it. So we went up to the shopkeeper and we said, oh, please, could you read this inscription for us? And it says, use handmade things. And that to me was like, oh my goodness, you see all these pieces disappearing and people aren't making them anymore. And it was like a spoon maker just reached out and grabbed me, transcended space and time, and came into the 21st century with someone trying to pull them back, pull coal roasting, the spoon carving back on this spectacular ladle. So, of course, I did come home with the ladle and the cutting board. The cutting board was just spectacular. It had it was a mountain scene, very vertical. You could see the mountains coming down. And then at the bottom of this long frame was a cow and a milkmaid who was tipped over with her hands back and her feet flying and her shoe off in the air and the milk pail spilling the milk, and the cow, like wide-eyed, kind of going, oh, like that, with her leg lifted, and you know that cow had just delivered a swift kick, and that was a story in that family. Every milk person I've talked to is like, oh yeah, that really happened. So the cutting board and the spoon came home with me as because they spoke right to my heart. So the next slide. So this is on the way to that area that I was talking about. This is in Norway. And so we're so saddened by not finding these spoons. And out in the wild. I mean, and if we found them, they were buried deep in the bowels of museums. And I see this scenery, and my ancestors came from this area. And I looked at my wife and I said, how could you ever leave this? And she said, well, imagine that you come to America and you have this small spoon, which is what you can bring with you. And when you look at it, you don't see a spoon. You see the Norway, the beautiful, spectacular, austere Norway that you left. The next slide, please. So this is my most favorite spoon of many outstanding spoons in the Vesterheim collection. Because this is a pretty plain spoon. There's nothing totally special about it, except that you know that it was special because someone took the time to repair that broken spoon. So you see the metal wrapped around right at where the handle meets the bowl. Phil Oden, who's quite an expert in all craft Norwegian, and he knows knife making, and he said, oh, that was done by a silversmith, a knife smith. Like, that is expert work and very hard to do on wood, where you have to heat things up to solder it. So someone loved that spoon enough that when it broke, they repaired it like that. And that's love. That's love. That object carries love. And a mystery we don't get to know. But the emotion and the work expressed through the hands of who worked on that tells that story. Tells the meaning of that story. Next slide. Which is the end of the slideshow. So thank you so much. And now I entertain whatever questions you have. Greg, I turn it over to you. And Lauren, if I have misstated anything or there's, anything that you'd like to add knowing about these spoons, please just chime right in.
Yeah, I'm just going to, first off, before I even start with the Q&A, thank you so much, Liesl. That was such a wonderful presentation. I know that I was the one that got to see the slides before everyone else, but it was just great to see them along with the stories that you told. So thank you so much for doing this for us. Yeah, so basically right now I am going to be opening it up to questions. If you could please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. I will be going back and forth with Liesl, and if anything pops up where neither Liesl or I will be able to answer any questions, luckily I have Lauren with me today on all the knowledge that she can bring, so we will do our best to pose as many as we can. So I know that I already had a couple in the chat real quick. So the first one off is, what are the themes of Kohlrosing? Are there images or things, or is it just designs? Can it be whatever you want on and you put it there?
Yeah, for Kohlrosing, if you see me squirming around, I am wearing like really warm clothing, and I'm starting to get quite warm. So you might see me like trying to take off my boots or something. So the themes in Kohlrosing. In the old Kohlrosing, it's portraits of people, it's farm animals, it's a lot of flowers. There can be geometric forms around the bases, around the rims, but I would say more it's figurative, and it can be really cartoon-like. Now, as trying to do my best to bring Kohlrosing back and working with young, beautiful, talented crafters, they just blow me away with the things that they're doing. I have one student that was starting to teach Kohlrosing to monks in Bhutan. I'm not kidding. And then another one is making, he's trans and he's making name tags and stuff like that for all his trans pals with like new names and pronouns and pictures on them and stuff like that. Like that's meaning making. That's bringing it into the 21st century. So the subject matter is yours to choose from. If you can't draw it, you're not going to be able to cold roast it because you got to draw it on there first. So for you, you got to figure out what that is. And then two, just because you can draw it doesn't mean you can cold roast it. So you have to learn how to get kind of control of your knife. But I do stuff that is, that are realistic things. I do geometric designs. I do a lot of lettering. I do cartoons. I do Celtic work and knot work. This is an example of that kind of work that I do. And you can go crazy with it too, and just cover everything with cold roasting. That's what I say. And you can do it. Don't tell anyone I told you this, but a person could go into a bar and they could cold roast a bar table. It's possible.
If only this webinar wasn't recorded, Liesl.
I know. Now I'll be arrested. Okay. What else?
So I have a couple questions. I'm going to loop them all in. Basically on materials, there are some people asking about basically spoons carved out of horn. Was that a pretty common thing in Norway?
Yes, and I know enough to be dangerous about it, but my understanding of horn work, and this is mainly through Harley again, is that you would cut the horn to say a spoon shape, and then horn at temperature is like a natural plastic. So you bring it up to a certain temperature in a form that would have the shape of the spoon, and you press it into that. And I don't know if you have like a top and a bottom press. I just don't know enough about it. I see Loran nodding, so maybe that's true. Is that true? Yeah. But that also means if you get that spoon really hot, it will turn back into a horn. So, and I have some horn spoons, and the ones that I have look like they were really used to dig out some food, and maybe hot because it looks a little bit burnt there and kind of peeled back in layers. Horn is hair. I mean, it's just a different kind of hair. So it's weird in a most delightful way, but it's kind of weird.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I have two questions about basically the wood used for spoons. So other than birch, were there any other types of woods that were often used, or was it always birch, or what was like the second most common?
I think alder. I think gray alder. You want a hardwood. And one thing that I didn't understand until I traveled in Sweden and Norway is that they don't have a wide variety of species of trees like we do here. And it's because of the orientation of the mountains, and that the trees couldn't get up like over the Alps to migrate north. And our mountain ranges went north-south so that trees could migrate. So they don't have a lot of species. They have pine, they have birch, they have alder. Think in the southern areas, they might have maple, and not too much more than that. So alder and birch were the common things that spoons were made out of, to my knowledge. I would say if you want to go into a deep dive, somewhere in the Vesterheim, YouTube channel, find Fred talking about spoons. Fred Livesay talking about spoons, and he covers that in a lot more depth. So his is a great talk. I would listen to it. I listened to it preparing for this.
I actually had quite a few questions about your preference on some cold roasting tips and tricks. So basically, do you have a preferred cold roasting knife and stains? And then also, if you could do a quick order of operations for the pigment oiling and burnishing procedure.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I can. And now I'm just standing up, and I think, oh, hold on, I have a coal roasting knife. Okay, I'm back. I talked about it as a democratic craft. Everything I need to coal roast fits in my pocket. This is my complete kit right there. So I've got oil in these little guys, these little tins right here. I have pigment, and I'll come back to that. I have a fine point coal roasting knife, a more wide point coal roasting knife, an antler burnisher, and then there's some pencils over here. So that's all I need. The person making the best and almost only coal roasting knives right now is Del Stubbs, DELSTUBBS at Pinewood Forge. He's retired. He's a spectacular knife maker, but he has arthritis in his hands, and the only knives that he's making now are coal roasting knives. And those knives look like this. I get good light on it there. There you go. That said, you can use the tip of a knife and just the very, very tip of the knife. I tend to push the blade. And if you do it, where's a good camera angle like this, do your best to keep the blade upright and not keeled over like a pencil, but really upright. That's the biggest advice I can give you, is have that blade upright, and I push it with my thumb right about down there. And I would try to keep this straight a little bit too, so I don't slip out. So that's blade control 101. The pigments that are rock solid, just ground cinnamon from Costco, from the co-op, from the Hy-Vee, wherever, just ground cinnamon. And then the oil that I use is Mahoney's walnut oil. And I like it a little better than linseed oil because it doesn't get so yellow and it cures a little bit quicker. The order of operations is you have to have as good a surface as you can have, like really sharp knife. If you can't get a really good knife finish, then down to like 400-600 grit sandpaper. And then I burnish the whole thing. I use an antler, little antler tip, or other pieces of antler. And let's say this is the wood. Burnish it, and that just compresses all of the fiber, makes a nice, really smooth surface. And that compressed fiber helps to not have the background be muddy as you're working with pigment and oil. And put a layer of oil on it, Mahoney's, let that go overnight, put another layer of oil on it, let that go overnight, about 3 coats down. There are other things that you can do that are more involved, but this is a great place to start. And then the sequence is draw the design. I like to draw the design with, do I have it here? Yeah, I have one that's kind of all bashed up, but this is a polychromos. It's all off there, you can't see, but this is a Faber-Castell polychromos pencil, which is oil-based, which means I can draw on oil, a slip of oil, and it will wipe off and you don't see any trace of your pencil sketch. So I sketch it on. I might do a really detailed sketch with a Blackwing, a very sharp Blackwing pencil, and then cut, put pigment in, put a drop of oil on top of that, rub it in really well, and then take your burnisher and burnish it closed. Leave the cuts open if you're making a bunch of cuts and you need to be able to feel where those cuts are. So it's just building up of a lot of layers. You make a few strategic lines. You might need to redraw it because you've rubbed some of that off, and you cut some more lines. put pigment in, cut some more lines, and you build it up. And then when you're at a place where you've got the work that you need to be able to feel with the knife, like that stage of it is done, and then you just burnish the whole thing closed and put one last layer of oil on it. So that's the quick recipe.
I was asked, can you spell the name of the pencil?
Polychromos, Polychromos, made by Faber-Castell. They're oil-based colored pencils. And then the graphite pencil that I like is a Blackwing pencil.
All right, I just put that in the chat. So I have, you talked about cinnamon. What pigment did they use, like the historical examples?
Ground bark. And so cinnamon is ground bark, tree bark, and ground winter birch bark that has a deep red color, beautiful brick deep red color. Ground alder bark, which has a darker gray brown color. I heard recently pine bark, but I haven't tried that, and I would be like, is there a lot of resin in there? So I haven't tried that experiment. I myself love to use walnut bark. Ground walnut bark is just a beautiful, very subtle brown, dark color. I really like it, but it will really get into stuff, and walnut really stains. So you have to have good technique to use walnut, but that's my personal favorite.
All right, I have the last 5 questions here. I'm going to try to get them all. First off, Mahoney oil, what is that made from?
Walnut.
Walnut. Thank you. That was the easiest one. I'm getting into the harder ones now. Yeah, it's a quiz. We're gonna get up. Yeah.
I feel like I'm in Decorah on trivia night.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I'm gonna put 2 questions together. Were there a lot of spoons in the US that were brought from Norway? And then adding on to that, how common of those spoons had coal rosing came to America?
Well, I'm going to hand that one right over to Lorianne. You're getting first on that one.
Oh, that's a good question. We're a little bit biased because I guess we know best what has come into the collection with the information, but certainly a lot of people brought spoons. One reason would be that they needed to, in the early days, especially in the years of sailing ships, you had to provide your own food and cook for yourself on the ship. So you would be bringing spoons partly just for functional reasons to use there. You would also bring some because you maybe were the carver or knew the carver and wanted that as a memento. And this is a little bit of aside from Liesl's presentation, but many people brought silver spoons that had been given as a wedding gift or a baptism gift, knowing that they could always sell them if times got tough. It was inherent wealth to have it silver. So there were definitely a lot of spoons coming to the US, and we're very lucky that many have survived, and many have been given to the museum with coal roasting. And so I put a link in the chat if you'd like to see a few more of Vesterheim's spoons, many of them coal roast, that are online in the virtual galleries.
Thank you, Lorianne. Then my final 2 questions. Were the spoons always carved green? And if so, were there any special drying techniques?
I would guess that at the pace they were going, they were carved green because that would be really fast. I can't imagine being able to carve 45 or 60 hardwood dried spoons in a day. I mean, I can't imagine it anyway, but it seems like pretty impossible for me if they were not green, at least in a bunch of this process. They would have been finished dry, and they were so thin. And I'm sure, I mean, I've done enough work with a draw knife to know that you can get all of that really pretty thin, so that the cracking that happens with drying happens when the wood is thick. And these spoons are just like bird bones. They're really, really delicately thin and yet strong at the same time. They're really, engineering wise, they're just fabulous spoons. And because they're well carved, they also have a consistent weight through them, and that helps with drying without to minimize cracking and to minimize warping. So I'm speaking not because I know that they did that, but I'm speaking as a spoon carver there and someone that uses a draw knife a lot.
Okay, the final question.
I'm
Okay.
ready.
Have you ever seen a spoon that has had a timeline chlorosed on it? Like Primstav, or it had, I know you talked about that Tina that had the date of delivery, but I'm just wondering if you saw anything that had like a calendar.
I have not. I have not. The collection that the COVID collection that I made that was at ASI, the spoons were a timeline, and I put the date and the month on all of those, and they captured what was happening in those tumultuous times from 2020 to 2024. But I haven't seen a timeline in a spoon, and I'm like, someone needs to do that, man. Good idea.
Hey, you know, if only there was like a class coming up at Vesterheim that we could talk about that in March or something. Yeah. Yeah, it's already my little plug at the end. So I don't, and I just want to remind, I just want to thank to the person who commented it. It is really cool that we also have a copy of that Tildal chair at the Vesterheim collection as well. Yes.
Okay, my next trip down, we're getting that baby out.
Yeah. All right. Well, a good warning to Loran. I'll let you know that now.